Before I share this story, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far my voice can travel. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. It helps me keep telling the truths that are often hidden. The printer spat out the last page at 2:11 a.m., and with it my marriage cracked like thin ice under a heavy step. The paper was still warm when I lifted it from the tray, the smell of toner sharp in the kitchen air, the screen of my old laptop lighting the sink in a hospital blue. Outside, Miami rain tapped at the window like a patient knuckle. On the top right corner of the statement, there was a bank logo I knew but never used, and beneath it a name that did not belong to me. Monthly transfers. 1,200 here, 800 there, 2,000 on birthdays and at Christmas. The earliest transaction I could scroll to was October 2016. A woman's name kept repeating like a metronome through the years. I whispered it once and felt my tongue recoil as if the word were bitter. I had been asleep 15 minutes earlier, convinced that the missing money was buried in business costs or taxes that his accountant had filed late again. I had set an alarm to wake up and try at night because that was when our home was quiet and the house did not perform for anyone. Now the house watched me read. I had spent the last 3 years sewing our lives together with coupons and patience. From 2021 on, when his construction work slowed and claims took months to pay, I learned the price of ordinary things with surgical precision. $4.29 for a gallon of milk at the cheaper store. $67 a month for the phone after I argued with a customer service rep in January. $386 for my mother's prescriptions when her arthritis flared. I felt useful. I felt competent. I believed that survival was a skill we were mastering together. He told me often that I was his anchor. He said it with the soft warmth of someone who had just eaten and wanted a nap. I took his hand and rubbed the calloused ridge where his palm met his thumb and told him we would be fine. In March, he asked me to move $12,000 from my savings into his business account to cover a supplier he claimed could not wait. He asked so gently that the number felt smaller. I did it the same day, then cooked arroz con pollo and hummed while the rice simmered. That night, he slept facing the wall. I kissed the back of his shoulder and thought the ocean of worry would calm by morning. 2 months later, his sister called and told me we had to be there for him because he carried the whole family on his back. She used that phrase every time money went missing. It was a trick she perfected back when his mother was sick. She positioned her guilt as loyalty and wrapped it in February sunshine. When I hesitated, she reminded me that he chose me against their advice, that he fought for us when we were young and stupid and poor. I remembered the summer of 2001, a 2-room apartment in Hialeah, our mattress on the floor and the fan clacking on its stand while we ate supermarket peaches over the sink. I remembered promising that we would always tell each other the truth. That old vow now sat in my chest like a pebble caught in breath. The first lie that ripped open that promise did not announce itself as a lie. It arrived as a request that felt impossible, but was delivered with the tired tone of a husband who had been brave for too long. He asked me to co-sign a line of credit using the small home my mother left me in Orlando. He framed it as a bridge. He said it was for 3 months until a contract paid out. He said the interest would be negligible. He said the bank manager is a friend and only needs my signature to move things along. I could smell motor oil on his shirt and the faint sweetness of the gum he always chewed to hide tobacco. I asked for numbers. He kissed my hair and said tomorrow. The next day he left early. That night, he forgot. 2 days later, he got angry that I did not trust him when he had built floors and roofs and lives for us with these hands. He lifted his palms and showed them like evidence. I wanted to believe those hands were court documents that proved his case. The fear that nudged me out of bed tonight began with a minor thing. Our internet bill showed a charge for a separate mobile hotspot. I thought it was a mistake and opened the banking app to check auto payments. The password failed twice. On the 3rd try, the app told me to wait 30 minutes. I stood there with the refrigerator whirring behind me, thinking of the last time he changed a password without telling me. It was the year we sold the boat. He said the buyer wanted to see a screenshot fast, and he borrowed my phone and reset the login because his battery was dead. We laughed about it. He never changed it back. Now my chest prickled. I opened his old laptop that he let gather dust on the shelf and typed the old hint he swore he would never forget. The screen hesitated, then gave. My hands did not shake. That would come later. I searched emails. I found the bank I did not know. I clicked a link that took me to a portal I had never used, and a clean dashboard opened its indifferent face to me. I clicked statements. Every month was a tin door. I opened October 2016 and read the first wire to the name I would come to taste like metal. I whispered it and tried to place it among the people in our lives. A realtor, a vendor, a subcontractor. No face fit. I scrolled to the memo line and found a word that removed those guesses. Support. The word sat on the line like a quiet verdict. The next month it was clothing. The month after that, it was dentist. Once it was school. There was a pattern that felt like a life being maintained elsewhere on our budget. I pressed my finger to the screen as if my touch could blur the print. I checked the address of the account and saw New Brunswick, New Jersey. My throat clicked. He had never worked in New Jersey. He had never even driven through it. He hated the cold. He had said the North was where happiness goes to freeze. I kept scrolling, month after month, year after year, until the present. December gifts, January rent, February groceries, March rent again. The numbers stepped neatly along a line that crossed right through my wedding ring. I went hunting for the origin of the money. Deposits told their own story in a tidy column. Checks from jobs I knew. Transfers from the account we shared. Cash deposits made at a branch a mile from our house. 3,000 here. Then a split of 1,500 and 1,500 the next day that mirrored a payment north within 24 hours. I thought of all the nights I taught extra shifts at the language center to cover our credit cards. I thought of the time I took my ring to a pawn shop on Biscayne and promised the man behind the glass I would redeem it by Friday. I bought it back 3 weeks later with a late fee and shame that burned more than the mark the ring left on my finger. The woman in New Jersey never pawned my ring. She was paid on time. I walked to the sink and let cold water run over my wrists. I said his name into the empty room and listened for a response that would break the spell. The refrigerator clicked off. The rain grew louder. I heard myself ask the obvious question in a voice that sounded too calm to belong to me. Who is she? The answer did not live in the kitchen. It lived in a contact hidden inside his phone, in photographs tucked behind an app that looked like a calculator, in tax records that could be subpoenaed by a future version of me who had lost patience with the milk and the coupons and the tenderness. Right now, I was just a woman with a hot page in her hand and a timeline in her head. I sat at the table and remembered July 2019, the year the roof leak ruined our bedroom wall. He had said that was the worst July of his life. These statements told me a different story. That July, he sent the woman $979 with a note that said school supplies. Meanwhile, I pulled a mattress into the living room and slept under the hum of the air conditioner that we kept at 78 to save on power. He told me I looked adorable in my old college shirt and asked me to turn off the lamp when I read after 10 because the light made him nervous. He had eyes for electricity. He had eyes for every bill except the one he was paying in New Jersey. When I reread that line, school supplies, a wave moved through me. It was not rage yet. It was a cold understanding that set the table for rage like silverware. I printed the most recent 6 months and tucked them into a manila folder as if I were preparing a case for a judge. I do not know why I did it. Maybe I wanted the weight of paper to keep me from floating away. Maybe I wanted to hear the sound of pages moving, something physical in a night that had become unreal. Between March and May, there were 2 transfers for rent and 1 for a clinic. The clinic had a real name I could look up. I did. It was a pediatric practice. I blinked and pinched the bridge of my nose and tasted the metallic tip of fear. I thought of the word support again. I thought of the way he sometimes stared at children on the beach, not with longing for a baby, but with a strange quiet that used to startle me until I learned to file it under fatigue. I pressed my palm to the folder as if I could calm the heart that lived inside it. At 2:23 a.m., the front door clicked softly, and he stepped into the kitchen. The rain had slicked his hair into lines. He saw the printer light and the laptop glow, and me at the table with the folder. For a second, he looked like a man who walked into the wrong house. Then he smiled in that careful way a person smiles at a barking dog. He set his keys down. He glanced at the printer. He said my name as if it might help. I saw him calculate the distance to the folder. I closed my hand over it and finally felt the tremor I had been waiting for. My whole arm shook like a wire humming between poles. He opened his mouth. I lifted the first page so he could see the name at the top. I said it out loud without bitterness, only gravity. He stared at the letters as if they were a language he did not speak. Then he said a sentence that still echoes in the pipes of this house. He said, "It is not what you think." The sentence hovered between us, delicate and false. I could smell the night on his clothes. I could see a fleck of mud near the heel of his shoe. I looked at his palms, those old affidavits, and felt something inside me shift from inquiry to indictment. He stood there, wet hair dripping onto the tile, while the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence he didn't know how to break. My hand tightened around the folder until the corners cut into my palm, paper against skin, sharp enough to remind me I was awake. His eyes kept flicking to the printer, then back to me, as if the machine itself had betrayed him. He took a step forward, and I raised the page higher, the one with the pediatric clinic's name bold across the middle. I asked again, slower this time, "Who is she?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then forced that old rehearsed smile that had convinced me so many times before. He leaned on the counter like a man settling into a conversation about bills, as though this was another misunderstanding we could iron out before sunrise. But his voice betrayed him. It trembled, the way it only did when he was cornered. "It's not what you think," he repeated, softer now, as if volume could change the weight of the words. The kitchen seemed smaller, the walls pressing in, and my memory rushed to fill the space with every sacrifice I had made in the name of us. I remembered 2018, when I canceled my night classes because his sister said he needed me at home more. I remembered the $4,000 I wired to his cousin in Honduras, because he said the man would lose his house otherwise. I remembered the 15 Christmases where I wrapped secondhand gifts for our nieces and nephews, while he insisted family came before luxury. My entire life had been molded to fit the contours of his excuses. And here they were, laid out in columns and rows on official paper. A second household, a second life, and me financing it without knowing. I thought of my mother's house in Orlando, signed over to a credit line that I now knew had nothing to do with suppliers or contracts. It had bought time for a lie to grow. When he finally moved toward me, his hand brushed my wrist as though he could still calm me the way he once did when I was 23 and sobbing over unpaid rent. But I wasn't 23 anymore. I had lived 2 decades inside his narrative, raising his family's emergencies as if they were my own children. And now I saw the choreography. Every "we'll get through this," every "just trust me," had been a curtain to hide the steady flow of cash into another woman's life. My voice cracked, but it did not falter when I told him, "You stole years from me." He flinched like I had struck him, but his answer was silence, broken only by the rain pounding harder against the glass. I realized then that he had always trusted the storm outside to drown the storm inside. Only this time, it was not enough. I pushed the folder across the table toward him, pages spilling out like a trail of evidence no lawyer could contest. He shuffled through them, and I watched his fingers hesitate on the line marked "school supplies." His jaw tensed, his shoulders sagged, and in that moment, I saw it. Admission without words. I thought I would scream, but instead a strange calm settled over me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The calm of someone who finally sees the whole map of their own life and understands they have been walking in circles. My eyes locked on his, and I asked again, this time with precision, "How long have you been paying for her rent?" The truth was already inked into the paper, but I needed to hear it break from his lips. He swallowed. His throat moved once, twice. The clock above the sink ticked 3 times before he whispered, "Since before we married." The sentence didn't just wound me. It shattered the timeline of our marriage. Every anniversary toast, every shared struggle, every holiday photo had been layered over a secret that predated my vows. I could almost hear the fabric of my life ripping apart at the seams. The rain outside turned torrential, the gutters spilling over, and I thought about how he once compared marriage to a house you had to maintain together. I wanted to laugh at the metaphor now, bitter and hollow, because I had been patching the leaks while he built another foundation somewhere else. The smell of wet earth seeped through the window screens, and I found myself wondering absurdly if it smelled like this in New Jersey too, when she lit candles for dinner. He dropped into the chair opposite me, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his own deceit. I studied him like he was a stranger who had wandered into my kitchen, someone I might offer a towel but never trust with my keys. He reached for my hand, and for the first time in 24 years of marriage, I pulled it back without hesitation. The withdrawal felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I didn't know was gone. He stared at me, mouth open, but no sound came. I let the silence grow, heavy and undeniable, until it became clear there was nothing he could say that would stitch the wound he had carved open with every wire transfer. I stood, folder clutched to my chest like armor, and walked toward the hallway, my bare feet silent on the cold tile. Behind me, his voice finally broke, a single plea. My name, spoken like a confession, like a man who knew he had just lost the only life he thought he could juggle. I closed the bedroom door behind me, but the wood was too thin to hold back the echo of his voice. He stayed in the kitchen, pacing, muttering half-formed sentences that reached me like fragments through water. I pressed my back to the door and slid down until I sat on the carpet, the folder heavy in my lap. My hands trembled as I opened it again, staring at the black and white numbers that now carried color, smell, texture. Each line had a season, a memory it contradicted. In 2014, when I was rationing gas just to drive to work, he was wiring $700 labeled as groceries. In 2019, when I pawned my grandmother's earrings to pay our daughter's tuition, he sent bound $200 labeled as rent. In 2020, while we quarantined in fear, scrubbing groceries in the sink, he somehow found a way to wire her holiday gifts. The betrayal was not abstract. It lived in years I could never relive, in sacrifices that could never be undone. My chest ached with the weight of silence. I wanted to scream, to pound on the walls, to throw the folder out the window and let the rain destroy it. But I sat there, still, because rage felt too fragile against a truth so enormous. Instead of fury, what swelled inside me was disbelief. How had I not seen it? How had I excused the missing dollars, the late-night phone calls, the sudden business trips? I remembered the Christmas of 2017, when he claimed a supplier emergency forced him to leave on December 22nd. I spent the holiday alone, decorating a tree with cheap ornaments from Dollar Tree, whispering Merry Christmas to the blinking lights while telling myself he was working for us. But the statement in front of me said otherwise. That December 23rd, a transfer of $900, memo, Christmas gifts. She had been unwrapping what I had been mourning. When he finally opened the bedroom door, I didn't rise. He leaned against the frame, shoulders hunched, and for the first time I noticed the exhaustion in his face. Not from work, but from years of performing two lives. His lips parted, searching for a place to start, but every word he chose was already buried under receipts. She needed help, he said at last, his voice cracked and raw. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I let the words hang, absurd in their simplicity. Help. That word had justified everything in our marriage. His family, his friends, every request that drained my savings, my time, my health. Help had been his shield, and I had been its willing soldier. But this time the word sounded like an insult. You call that help? I asked, my voice sharp as glass. You built her a life while you dismantled mine. He sank into the armchair in the corner, head in his hands. His silence was not guilt. It was calculation. I knew him well enough to see it. He was already searching for the version of this story that would absolve him. The narrative where I misunderstood, where circumstances forced his hand, where he had no choice but to keep the secret. I realized then how many times I had let him reshape reality, how easily I had let him fold my doubts into origami until they were too small to matter. Not tonight. The evidence was here, and the years were gone. My tears finally came, hot and unrelenting, but not for him. They were for me, for the woman who had given 24 years of loyalty, love, and labor to a man who siphoned it away in monthly installments. Through my sobs, I asked the question that had burned since I saw the pediatric clinic's name. Is there a child? The silence that followed was louder than any scream. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his lips pressed thin. That was my answer. I clutched the folder tighter, my heart racing so violently I thought it might shatter my ribs. A child meant permanence. A child meant the life I thought I was building wasn't just shared. It was duplicated. Every sacrifice I had made had not only supported him, but her, and now possibly someone else who bore his face. I whispered the words like a curse. You made me invisible in my own marriage. He dropped his head again, unable to look at me, and I knew he wasn't sorry for the act, only for the discovery. The rain outside slowed to a steady drizzle, as if the storm had exhausted itself. But inside me, the storm had just begun. I rose to my feet, folder clutched like a shield, and walked to the dresser where I kept my mother's rosary. My hand shook as I touched the beads, not out of faith, but out of need for something that belonged only to me, untouched by his lies. He watched me from the chair, small and diminished, and for the first time I felt taller than him, stronger. Years of sacrifice, manipulation, the impossible requests that had stolen my security, they all converged into one undeniable truth. He had rewritten my life without my consent. And now, finally, I was holding the pen. I stood there clutching the rosary, the beads digging into my palm, and I realized how many times I had prayed with it for the wrong reasons. I had whispered over those beads asking God to give me patience when he failed to come home on time. I had begged for strength when he told me we had to sell my mother's gold bracelet to pay another bill. I had prayed for his safety when he claimed he was working late in neighborhoods he said were dangerous. Now the truth flickered in my mind like a cruel film reel. While I prayed, he wired money. While I tightened our belts, he loosened his with someone else. And while I was asking for guidance, he was asking for secrecy. The rosary suddenly felt heavier than lead, a chain that had bound me to illusions. I dropped it onto the dresser, the clatter sharp, final. He shifted in the armchair, leaning forward as if proximity might rebuild what 24 years of deceit had destroyed. It wasn't love, he murmured, the words trembling. It was obligation. It started because she threatened to ruin me. I let out a dry laugh, hollow and sharp, the sound of disbelief. Obligation. Another disguise for choice. Another word crafted to soften the brutality of betrayal. I asked him plainly, and what about the child? Was that obligation too? His face twisted, torn between denial and confession, and finally he whispered, yes, he's mine. The word struck like a physical blow, and I stumbled back a step. All the years of half-truths collapsed into one undeniable reality. While I was building a family with him in sacrifice and scarcity, he was building another in secrecy and deception. The memory of 2015 resurfaced with brutal clarity. That was the year I miscarried, bleeding alone in the bathroom while he was away on another business trip. He returned 2 days later, smelling of cologne I didn't own, and held me while I wept, whispering we'd try again. But now I knew that the same year he was wiring money north. Memo. Hospital. I had buried grief in silence while he was financing another birth. I pressed my hand to my stomach, not because it hurt, but because I suddenly felt the ghost of what could have been. My knees gave, and I sank to the floor, not in weakness, but in mourning for a life I never had the chance to live. He tried to rise, maybe to comfort me, maybe to defend himself, but I lifted my hand in warning. Stay where you are. The authority in my voice surprised us both. For years, I had been the one bending, accommodating, surrendering in the name of harmony. Now I was the one drawing lines, not with compromise but with steel. He froze, his eyes searching for the softness that had once lived in me. It was gone. I told him, every dollar you sent her was stolen from me, from us, from the life we should have had. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. Don't you dare say it was for us. Don't you dare. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the faint drip of rain from the gutter outside. My mind raced with images of all the years of manipulation, the late-night arguments where he convinced me I was selfish for questioning him, the mornings where he left before dawn, saying sacrifice was the price of success. The nights where he told me family loyalty was the only thing that mattered, twisting my love into a currency he could spend elsewhere. Every impossible request, sign here, transfer this, wait just a little longer, had been a thread in a net designed to keep me bound. And now, with one folder, I had cut through it. The realization was both devastating and liberating. I had lost decades, but I had finally found clarity. I lifted the folder high, shaking it at him like a verdict. "This is not just paper," I said, my voice breaking but fierce. "This is my life written in numbers, and you can't rewrite it anymore." His eyes dropped to the floor, his shoulders collapsing inward. He was a man shrinking under the weight of his own lies, and I felt no pity. Not anymore. I gathered the pages back into the folder, closed it, and pressed it against my chest like armor once again. For the first time in years, I felt the sharp edge of my own will, and I knew this night was not the end of me. It was the end of him as the author of my story. The house was quiet now, the kind of quiet that made the air heavy. He stayed slumped in the armchair, head bowed like a man waiting for a sentence he already knew he deserved. I walked into the hallway and flicked on the light. Not for him, but for me. I needed to see clearly, no shadows, no half-light illusions. As the bulb hummed to life, I remembered the countless times he had dimmed lamps during conversations, the way he always preferred low light when discussing money, contracts, family emergencies. He had crafted our life in shadows. Now, standing in the full glare of the hallway lamp, I realized how long I had been trained to live in dimness. I thought back to 2007, the year we almost lost our home. He told me then that the bank was unfair, that circumstances had stacked against him, that we only needed to tighten our belts until the storm passed. I worked extra shifts, canceled a long-dreamed trip to Cuba with my sister, and sold my wedding dress to a second-hand shop in Coral Gables for $340. He kissed me that night, whispering that we were stronger than money. Yet the statement in my hand showed that same month he sent $1,100 to her account. She had been shopping for school supplies while I had been bargaining with strangers over the price of lace. The memory seared into me. How easily I had been molded by his narrative, how naturally I had taken guilt and turned it into sacrifice. The folder grew heavier the more I thought of the years I lost. I opened it again, flipping to May 2022. A line marked simply, mortgage. Not ours, hers. Paid in full. The bile rose in my throat as I realized that while I had been reusing coffee filters and stretching leftovers into soups, he had been securing her roof. I thought of the leaky ceiling in our kitchen, the bucket I had placed under the drip, the way I laughed it off to neighbors saying we'd fix it when work picked up again. He had never fixed it, because his money had already fixed hers. The lie was so complete, so methodical, that I felt small for ever believing I was his partner. I was his cover, his camouflage, the shadow that kept his double life hidden. I turned toward him, my voice cold, stripped of tenderness. "How much of me did you plan to bury in her life?" He looked up, eyes bloodshot, and for the first time there was no performance. He didn't try to smile, didn't try to soften the edges. He just stared, silent, a man revealed. That silence was confirmation enough. My body shook, not from fear, but from the sudden clarity that I was standing at the crossroads of two futures. In one, I remained in this house, diminished, rewritten. In the other, I walked out with the folder and reclaimed the years I still had left. I remembered the impossible request he had made just last month. He asked me to cash out the small retirement fund I had built working at the language center. "Just for a short while," he said, "until things balance out." I almost did it. I almost signed the papers. And now I knew exactly where that money would have gone. The thought chilled me. He hadn't just stolen my past. He had been aiming for my future. I pressed the folder tighter to my chest, my pulse steadying as resolve replaced grief. I told him, "You will not take $1 more from me." The words felt like a vow, stronger than any promise I had ever spoken at an altar. He opened his mouth, desperate, and for a moment I saw the flicker of the man I had married, the one who once held me on a balcony in Havana. promising the world while fireworks lit the night. But that man was gone, buried under layers of lies. And the figure in front of me was only the architect of my suffering. I turned toward the bedroom, pulled open the closet, and began pulling out a suitcase. His voice rose behind me, pleading, but I moved with the precision of someone who had finally awakened. Clothes, documents, photographs of my mother, all went into the case. Each item I packed was a piece of myself I was reclaiming from his script. When I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound was final, louder than his words. He stood now, reaching toward me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I warned, and the authority in my tone froze him mid-step. For years, I had been the one who yielded. Tonight, I was the one drawing borders. He collapsed back into the chair, defeated, and I walked past him with the suitcase in one hand and the folder in the other. The front door loomed ahead. The rain outside softened to a mist. As I reached for the knob, I looked back once. Not at him, but at the home I had poured myself into, the walls that had absorbed my sacrifices. And I whispered to myself, "No more." The night air hit me like a slap, cool and damp with the aftertaste of rain. I stepped onto the porch with my suitcase rolling behind me, the folder pressed tight against my chest. The street was quiet, glistening under the weak glow of street lamps, puddles scattered like broken mirrors across the asphalt. My car sat at the curb, droplets still dripping from its roof. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing, the weight of years pressing down yet beginning to lift. Behind me, through the thin walls of the house, I could hear him moving, his footsteps slow, hesitant, not daring to follow. He knew that if he stepped into this night with another excuse, another manipulation, I might tear him apart with the fury I had been silencing for decades. As I walked toward the car, the memories flooded in, sharp and relentless. The birthdays spent alone because of emergencies. The years of stretching groceries, of apologizing to friends for why we couldn't join dinners, of telling myself that loyalty meant endurance. Every one of those moments played in my head like a reel of sacrifices that were never mine to make. They had been orchestrated to finance someone else's comfort. I thought about 2012, the year we couldn't afford to fix the air conditioner in the Florida summer, sleeping on damp sheets, fanning ourselves with old magazines, while he still sent her $950 marked utilities. I had been cooking by candlelight when the power bill went unpaid, while he was keeping her lights burning bright hundreds of miles away. That image seared itself into me like a scar that would never fade. I reached the car and placed the suitcase in the trunk, the slam of it echoing down the empty street. My hands lingered on the metal as I steadied myself. The folder was still against my chest, my shield, my evidence, my reminder that I had not imagined the betrayal, that it was written, line after line, in undeniable ink. I sat in the driver's seat, the leather cold against my back, and turned the key. The engine hummed to life, steady and obedient, the opposite of the man I had left inside. I gripped the wheel and stared straight ahead, headlights cutting through the mist like a path I had never dared to follow until now. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, his name glowing on the screen. For years, that name had been my anchor, my safety, the place I ran when the world turned cruel. Tonight, it looked like poison. I watched the call ring, the vibration rattling against the plastic, but I didn't touch it. Not this time. I let it ring, let it die, let the silence settle back in. And with that small act of refusal, I felt the first thread of freedom wrap around me, fragile, but real. He no longer had access to me with just the press of a button. That realization was like oxygen filling lungs that had been starved for too long. I thought of where to go. Orlando, maybe, to the house that had been my mother's, though even that place was tainted now, tied to the loan I never should have signed. Still, it was mine. My blood in its walls, my childhood laughter echoing faintly in its empty rooms. Maybe I would drive there tonight. Maybe I would sit on the porch and watch the sunrise over the old oak trees, breathing air that wasn't laced with lies. Or maybe I would go to my sister's, knock on her door, collapse into her arms, and finally tell her everything I had hidden for years. Wherever I went, it would be away from him, away from the shadows he had crafted for me. The drizzle began again, light drops striking the windshield, and I turned on the wipers. Each sweep cleared the glass, and I realized that was exactly what I was doing, clearing the fog from my own vision, wiping away years of distortion. I whispered to myself, "You are not the woman he made you." The words startled me with their strength, and tears welled up, not of despair this time, but of recognition. I had been invisible in my own marriage, erased line by line, but tonight I was visible to myself. The woman gripping the steering wheel was not broken. She was scarred, yes, but scars were proof of survival, not defeat. I put the car in drive, the wheels splashing through the wet pavement, carrying me forward. Behind me, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, its lights glowing weakly, a cage pretending to be a home. I whispered goodbye, not to him, not even to the marriage, but to the version of myself who had endured too much for too long. The road stretched ahead, endless and unknown, but for the first time in years, it was mine. I pressed the accelerator and let the night swallow me whole, carrying me toward a future I would have to build from the ashes of betrayal. And as the rain softened to a mist, I felt it, the faint, trembling pulse of freedom. The highway stretched out before me, slick with rain and gleaming under the orange wash of streetlights. Each mile I drove felt like peeling off another layer of his control, like shedding a skin I had never realized was suffocating me. My hands were firm on the wheel, but inside me a storm still raged. Between one exit and the next, the tears came, blurring the dotted white lines into streaks. I gripped the wheel tighter and let them fall, heavy, hot, unstoppable. They weren't the silent tears I had trained myself to hide over the years. They were violent, jagged sobs that shook my shoulders and echoed inside the car. I let them come because for once I wasn't holding myself together for anyone else. For once, I wasn't performing loyalty to a man who never deserved it. When the sobs finally eased into shallow breaths, I rolled down the window and let the night air slap against my face. It smelled of wet asphalt, gasoline, and the faint salt of the ocean carried inland. That air was mine, untainted by his lies. For years, I had shared every breath, every dollar, every plan with him, only to discover that I had been financing my own erasure. Now, with the folder on the passenger seat like a companion, I felt the fragile outline of something I had forgotten long ago. Myself. I whispered into the dark. You still exist. The words felt strange, but also like the first brick in rebuilding a life he had tried to bury. The green glow of an exit sign for Orlando appeared ahead, and with it, memories of my mother's house. The small porch with chipped paint, the creak of the wooden steps, the smell of orange blossoms from the neighbor's yard in spring. That house had been my first real inheritance, my anchor. And yet, even that he had tried to take, convincing me to sign it over as collateral, calling it temporary, calling it necessary. I remembered his words that day. We'll get it back, I promise. Trust me. I had trusted, but the folder on the seat told me the truth. Her rent had been paid while my mother's house had been pawned. I clenched my jaw so tight my teeth ached, fury rising again like a second tide. As I passed the exit, I thought about every manipulation he had spun, every story that had kept me silent. The one that stung most was 2016, when he claimed his cousin was in danger of losing everything after a hurricane. He begged me to wire $5,000, swearing it was to rebuild the man's home. I gave it without hesitation, but the statement had shown that same week a transfer of the same amount to her account with the note, "New start." My sacrifice had not rebuilt a cousin's house. It had built hers. That discovery gnawed at me as the miles rolled by, each one a bitter reminder of how deeply he had choreographed my blindness. I pulled into a rest stop around 3 a.m., the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the parking lot half empty except for a line of trucks humming in their sleep. I parked near the edge, shut off the engine, and leaned back in the seat. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind was sharp, slicing through years of deception with brutal clarity. I reached for the folder again, flipping through the pages under the harsh white light. Every line looked different now, Not just numbers, not just evidence. They were gravestones for the pieces of me I had sacrificed. Each dollar sign was a tombstone marking where my trust had been buried. For a moment, I wondered if she knew. The woman in New Jersey, the one whose name appeared month after month. Did she know she was funded with stolen devotion? Did she know that the money carrying her rent, her groceries, her child's doctor bills had been carved from another woman's flesh and bones? Or had he fed her lies too, spinning tales of business success while I stretched meals of rice and beans into weeks? The thought made me nauseous. Perhaps she was a victim too, or perhaps she was a partner in the theft. Either way, the weight of their secret had been placed squarely on my shoulders, and I was done carrying it. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, the cool leather grounding me. My phone buzzed again. His name, relentless, glowing in the dark. I silenced it without looking, the gesture smoother now, easier. Each ignored call was another wall rising between us. He no longer had access to me in the way he always had, and that realization gave me a small surge of power. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, letting the hum of trucks lull me into a brief stillness. Tomorrow would demand choices, lawyers, banks, explanations to family who had always seen him as a savior. But tonight, in this rest stop, under these buzzing lights, I allowed myself to simply exist without him. The rest stop clock blinked 3:17 a.m., red digits cutting through the silence. My eyes were gritty, but sleep would not come. I leaned back in the seat and stared at the ceiling of the car, replaying every scene of our life together as if I were trapped in a cruel theater. The first date at the Cuban cafe, where he told me he believed in destiny. The night he knelt on the beach with a simple silver ring and asked me to be his wife. The countless mornings where he kissed my forehead before leaving for work, his breath carrying the faint taste of mint gum. They had all been scenes in a play I thought was mine, but now I understood I had been cast as a background character in a story he wrote for someone else. The audience had always been her, and I had been the unwitting understudy, keeping the show alive. I opened the folder again, the pages fluttering like wings in the dim light, and my eyes caught one line I hadn't noticed before. August 2011. A transfer for $3,400. Memo, wedding expenses. My blood ran cold. That was the same month we renewed our vows in a small church, a ceremony he had insisted on to remind ourselves what we're fighting for. I had worn a borrowed dress, and we had celebrated with homemade food, candles, and laughter with close friends. But the numbers told me that while I was recommitting my soul to him, he was funding a celebration in her name. I slammed the folder shut, my hands shaking. Even our most sacred promises had been staged over a foundation of deceit. The parking lot was still, the hum of the truck engine steady, a chorus of lives moving on while I sat in the wreckage of mine. I thought of the years I had played the role of caretaker, always defending him when relatives complained, always smoothing over his anger when he shouted at bills, always believing his stories when he said the world was against him. I had been his shield, his excuse, his constant, and he had repaid me by making me invisible, sending the very marrow of our life to sustain someone else. My throat tightened, and I whispered to no one. I was never enough for him. The words echoed in the hollow space of the car, but as soon as they were spoken, another truth rose up against them. I was more than enough. He was the one who lacked. A truck pulled out of the lot, headlights sweeping over my windshield before disappearing into the night. I envied its certainty, its destination, its purpose. I envied the driver who knew exactly where he was going while I sat here trying to piece together what came next. The thought of going back was impossible. A chain around my neck I would not wear again. But the path forward was uncharted, terrifying in its vastness. Divorce, lawyers, bank accounts frozen and dissected, family members choosing sides, the whispers of neighbors who thought we were unbreakable. I gripped the steering wheel again, grounding myself in the one certainty I now had. I was free to decide. For the first time in decades, the next move was mine alone. I thought again of the child, the one whose existence he had confirmed with downcast eyes. A life born from his betrayal, A life funded by my sacrifices. The weight of that truth pressed down, but then a flicker of clarity sparked in me. That child was innocent, untouched by the web of lies. I could not carry resentment toward them. It belonged entirely to him, to her, to the choices they had made. My anger had to be precise, like a blade, not scattered like shrapnel. Otherwise, it would destroy me too. I wiped at my face with trembling hands, realizing I was beginning to see the contours of survival. Not forgiveness. Not now. Maybe not ever. But survival. As dawn began to creep over the horizon, a pale line of light cutting through the clouds, I made a decision. I would not let this night swallow me. I would drive to Orlando, unlock my mother's house, and sit on that porch until the sun rose high enough to remind me the world had not ended. I would call a lawyer. I would call my sister. And I would tell them everything, no longer guarding the man who had built his kingdom on my silence. My story was no longer his to direct. The next chapter would be written by me, in my own hand, on my own terms. I turned the key in the ignition once more, the engine steady beneath me, and whispered into the growing light. It's my turn now. The road to Orlando stretched before me like a ribbon of possibility, damp from the night's rain and glowing faintly under the first blush of dawn. The world was waking up, delivery vans on their routes, headlights dimming, birds shaking water from branches. I drove in silence, the radio off, because I didn't want music or voices to interrupt the rhythm of my thoughts. Each mile carried me farther from the man I thought I knew, farther from the house where lies had grown like mold in the dark. The folder lay on the passenger seat, steady with every bump, like a silent companion reminding me why I could not turn back. As the sky lightened, memories arrived uninvited, each one colored differently now that I had the truth. I remembered the summer of 2009, when he told me he was driving out of state for a construction contract. He was gone 3 weeks, and I spent that time painting the kitchen cabinets alone, determined to surprise him with something beautiful when he returned. He came home exhausted, kissed me half-heartedly, and told me the job had fallen through, but at least he tried. I had believed him. But the statement from that summer told another story. 3 separate transfers to her, one of them labeled vacation. My paint-stained hands, my aching back, my hope of giving us a fresh start, none of it had been for him. He had been somewhere else, giving pieces of himself to another life while I was patching the one I thought was ours. The ache in my chest deepened, but alongside it grew something sharper: resolve. His betrayal was not just about money. It was about years stolen, sacrifices wasted, trust manipulated until it became blindness. Yet, as much as it hollowed me out, it also lit a fire. If he had the audacity to build 2 lives, then I would find the audacity to build one of my own, better, stronger, untouched by his deceit. That thought steadied me as the signs for Orlando appeared, green and familiar. By the time I pulled onto the street where my mother's house sat, the sun had risen higher, breaking through the last of the clouds. The small bungalow looked tired, its porch sagging slightly, paint peeling from the shutters. But it was mine. Every board, every nail, carried echoes of my childhood. Afternoons snapping beans with my mother, evenings listening to cicadas sing. I parked in the gravel drive and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, letting the sight of it wash over me. This house had been a safety net once, and though he had tried to turn it into collateral, it still stood, waiting for me. I carried the suitcase inside, the air smelling faintly of dust and oranges. The silence was thick, but it was a different kind of silence than the one I had left behind. This was not suffocating. It was spacious, open, like a blank page. I set the folder down on the kitchen table, the same table where my mother once rolled out dough for Sunday empanadas, and I whispered to myself, this is where it begins again. But even as the relief of being here settled over me, the weight of reality pressed back in. Divorce papers, bank accounts, lawyers, the endless unraveling of 2 decades woven together with lies. And then, the hardest truth, the child in New Jersey, who would always be a living reminder of the life he chose to build outside of ours. The thought of facing that reality twisted in my stomach. I poured a glass of water from the tap, the taste metallic, grounding me. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would be faced here, on my terms, in my house. I sat down at the table, the folder open before me again, and I felt the strangest thing: clarity. The years behind me were gone, wasted in someone else's shadow, but the years ahead, those belonged to me. I could still shape them, still claim them. I pressed my hand flat against the table, feeling the cool wood under my skin, and made a promise out loud. I will not let him write one more chapter of my life. The morning light spilled through the thin curtains, illuminating the dust in the air like tiny ghosts of the past. I sat at my mother's kitchen table, staring at the folder spread open in front of me. The numbers seemed quieter here, less like daggers and more like evidence in a case I had already won. Still, my stomach turned with every line I reread, each one another reminder of how long I had been living inside a lie. I closed my eyes and let the silence of the house wrap around me, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't suffocate me. It held me. It felt like truth. I thought of the years I had bent myself into impossible shapes to keep us afloat. The nights I went without sleep, grading papers after long shifts just to cover the smallest gaps in our finances. The birthdays I pretended were special, even when all I could afford was a homemade cake and a single candle. The vacations I dreamed of but never took because next year will be better. Every sacrifice I had made had been redirected, funneled into the life of a woman I never met, a child I never knew existed. It was a theft not only of money, but of my very years. And yet, staring at those pages now, I felt something shift inside me. Rage was still there, but beneath it, something else was rising, a hunger for liberation. I stood and walked to the porch, the boards creaking under my weight. The morning air smelled of damp earth and orange blossoms, and the sun was climbing higher, pushing shadows back into corners. I leaned against the railing and breathed in deeply. This was mine. This porch, this house, this morning. He hadn't stolen that. For the first time, I realized that his power over me was not permanent. He had consumed decades of my loyalty, but he had no claim on the years I had left. The thought steadied me like an anchor. Inside, my phone buzzed again. I didn't have to look at the screen to know it was him. The sound didn't twist my gut anymore. It only confirmed what I already knew. His voice, his pleas, his excuses would no longer reach me. I let the phone vibrate against the counter until it went still. Then I unplugged it from the charger, powered it down, and placed it face down inside the drawer. The silence that followed was absolute, and it felt like reclaiming space in my own head. I made coffee in the old percolator, the bitter aroma filling the kitchen. With each sip, I felt more awake, more present, more ready. My mind began sketching out what would come next. Calling a lawyer, freezing accounts, pulling every record I could find. I would no longer be the woman who asked for explanations. I would be the woman who demanded accountability. He had trained me to believe that questioning him was disloyalty. Now I understood that questioning him was survival. Still, the thought of family weighed heavy. His sister, who always praised his sacrifices. His mother, who once told me I was lucky to have him. What would they say when they learned the truth? Would they turn against me, blaming me for walking away? Or would they finally see the man behind the mask? I wasn't sure, but for the first time I didn't care. Their approval, their voices, their stories had all been part of the manipulation too. This was not about them anymore. This was about me. I opened the folder again and stared at the last transaction, dated just a week ago. Rent. Same woman. Same life funded by my absence. I touched the paper, and instead of feeling crushed, I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a fight. A fight for my freedom, my dignity, my future. I had been silent for too long, trained to believe endurance was strength. But real strength was walking away, even if my hands shook and my knees buckled. Real strength was refusing to live as a ghost in my own life. I whispered into the stillness of the kitchen, the words trembling but steady enough to carry. He took my years. He won't take the rest.